hello, once again, it's Matthew here from Matthew North Music. Thank you for watching my channel. And as ever, if you like the kind of videos I make, be them about records, which this one is, or other stuff to do with music, electronics, retro technology, old computers, whatever, please hit the subscribe button. It really does help the channel to grow. And if you find the kind of videos I'll make interesting, then please hit the subscribe button. It really does help the channel to grow. Now, today's video is something I wanted to do for ages, and it's about a series of albums that were called Hot Hits. Now, there's one there called Hot Hits 14. There's another one here that's Hot Hits 7, and that's Hot Hits 5. But the album I'm kind of thinking more about is this one, which is Hot Hits 16. Now, this was actually the first record that I ever owned, and it's fascinated me my entire life, really. My parents used to own a shop which sold sort of antiques and second-hand goods, and when I was about 3 years old, I think I probably walked into the shop, saw this on one of the racks, and I sort of took it out and started playing it, and I think that's how I ended up acquiring my first album. And I've been re-listening to this in more recent times, and I've really appreciated what a good record this is in terms of musical performance and production quality. Now, the Hot Hits albums were made by EMI, the biggest record company in the world at the time, and this was a budget product. Now, it's a bit of an odd thing, really, that EMI would do a budget product, but particularly when some of the artists on here, such as, you know, Paul McCartney, Wizard, Electric Light Orchestra, and so on, were all signed EMI artists, and here they are, kind of, you know, undercutting their own product, if you like. But EMI put these Hot Hits albums out. They made 20 of them in total of the main series, and I just think that these records are a really good snapshot in time in terms of the music, but also in terms of kind of how they were made. And I've been really fascinated to learn who the people are that played on these records, and there is a little bit of a tale to be told about that, because they were generally made by jobbing session musicians, and they would come in, do a session, make one of these albums, get their paycheck, and off they go. But I think the performances on some of these tracks are quite extraordinary. And the first track I'm going to play a little snippet of is the cover of The Temptations' Papa Was a Rolling Stone, because I think that just the production and the arrangement of it was absolutely spot on. Now, another song that's a really good cover on here is a cover of Carly Simon's You're So Vain. And I've recently discovered that the vocalist on this for You're So Vain was the singer Tina Charles, who had a big hit in the mid-70s. Now, she did a lot of session work over the years, and according to a radio documentary she was on a few years ago, where they talked about Top of the Pops. Now, the Top of the Pops albums were very similar to Hot Hits, except they were made by Pickwick Records, who I think ultimately were owned by RCA at some point. I think RCA, Camden, Pickwick, Hallmark, they were all kind of part of the same thing. And they used to produce loads of these albums, and they were put together in the same way as this, really, in that they would get a bunch of session musicians into a studio. Some of the main singers on Top of the Pops records were people. There's a guy called Tony Rivers, and another guy who I actually used to know when I lived in Teignmouth called Stuart Calver, and they were also both Cliff Richard's backing singers. And they would go in, they'd do a session of maybe 12 songs, and they'd knock it out in a day. And And Tina Charles sang on both records, and she sings "You're So Vain" on this record, and it's a really, again, a really great vocal, and we'll have a quick listen to that as well.
They were clouds in my coffee, clouds in my coffee, and you're so vain. You probably think the song is about you. You're so vain.
Now, one thing Tina Charles said on that documentary was, after she had a hit in 1976 called "I Love to Love," she stopped getting work for sessions, and she actually said that it was a bit of a shame, really, that now she had this hit, all the session work dried up, because basically that was her kind of bread and butter work for the previous sort of 5 or 6 years of doing it, which in a way is a bit of a shame, really, when your regular job has kind of gone. But as they say, that's show business. Now, I've been digging to try and find who the people are that were on these records. Now, the Hot Hits albums, they were put together by a guy called Bill Wellington. And he was basically the mastermind of it, booked all the session players, got them in. And I contacted a friend of mine, a well-known session sax player and arranger called John Altman. And I said to him, do you know anybody that might have been on these records? He gave me a couple of names. And one of them was a singer called Martin J. And I sent Martin a message, and he very kindly replied to my message. And he gave me a few little bits of information. And in fact, he actually sang on 7 of the 12 tracks on this particular album. He said that when they made these records, they were made in Morgan Studios in London mostly. And Morgan Studios at the time was a fairly new but well-equipped studio. They actually had 2 studios, one opposite side of the road to the other. One was a large studio and there was a smaller studio. And a session would typically start at 10 o'clock in the morning and go on till 5 o'clock in the evening with an hour for lunch. So that's basically 2 3-hour sessions. Now, in the world of session recording, 3 hours was the time a standard session would be. And at the time, the Musicians Union ran supreme, and when session players turned up for a session, if they were booked from, say, 10 till 1, they would turn up at 5 to 10, and they would sit there and wait, and then bang on 10 o'clock, they get their score open and they look at the music, and then they start recording. And as soon as they get to 1 o'clock, that's it, session over. And so these albums were done in 2 sessions, if you like, but on the same day. And for the hot hits, they would all go in together and pretty much cut each track as live, which is kind of how records were always made, really, up until probably the mid part of the 70s, when they started recording things where they'd maybe just do the bass and drums first and then add everything afterwards, or they would start working to a click track and then they just add things as and when they feel like it. But in the early 70s, everything was done as live in the studio. Now, Martin also said to me that with a lot of the session players that played on these records, they were quite often signed to labels, they were in contracts with bands, so they weren't, strictly speaking, supposed to do a lot of these things, but they did them anyway because it was a living. So that's why the names were always anonymous, so you're never really going to know who played on these records. Now, there are a few names that have cropped up from what I've been looking up on the internet, and one of the things was apparently Barry Morgan, the drummer of Blue Mink, played on a couple of the Hot Hits albums, possibly number 2 and number 4. The famous harmonica player Larry Adler, who I actually recorded in my day job about 30 years ago, he performed on the first album. And singer Tony Stevens apparently sang on one of the early Hot Hits albums and did Penny Lane by the Beatles on it. But the 2 names that keep cropping up from my research and after my conversation with Martin is Martin himself and Tina Charles. But I would love to know if anybody knows anyone that played on these records. Now, all the sleeves, they had, semi-scantily clad ladies on the cover, but they all kind of had a bit of a sporting theme. and you know, there's like a footballer there, but the early ones were just sort of, you know, more like people going out clubbing. But one of the credits that is actually on this record is on the back sleeve, and you won't see it from there, but I'll do a close up. But it says photographer Brian Ward. Now, Brian Ward, you all know his work because he did the sleeves for Hunky Dory and The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie. So very iconic album sleeves. And he did some of the other photos around that time as well for Bowie. So he did a lot by, but he did the lion's share of these covers as well for Hot Hits. But looking him up on the internet, there's very little information about him other than his credits for the Bowie albums. Now, I would like to play more of the songs off this record, but I can't because of a copyright strike or potential copyright strike. However, I have uploaded this to my other YouTube channel, and it's uploaded without any kind of problems. It just said that, which is fair enough, that the songs are copyrighted and the royalties go to the person. That's perfectly standard. Now, it's a real shame these aren't available officially on streaming sites or whatever, because, like I say, there's some really great versions of songs on here. Now, the Top of the Pops albums that came out on Pickwick, all of those are on all the streaming services, and they are credited as Top of the Poppers. So if you look up Top of the Poppers on Spotify or YouTube Music or Tidal or whatever, you will be able to listen to most of those albums. But the others you won't be able to find. Now, as with the covers, there was one fairly famous person that was on the sleeve of this, and that was the actress Caroline Munro. She was on a Hot Hits album. And this was another album I definitely remember having as a kid, although I don't actually have a copy of it at the moment. But this one, Hot Hit 16, is always going to be a real favourite of mine. And it's funny, listening to the version of Jean Genie, the Bowie track on here, it makes it more obvious where that song came from, because Bowie was obviously a big fan of the Yardbirds because he obviously covered them on the Pin-Ups album. But the main riff of the Jean Genie is a song called I'm a Man, a blues standard that Yardbirds did. And then it's kind of morphed into Smokestack Lightning, another Howling Wolf number, which the Yardbirds also did. And it's just more noticeable that that's where those songs have come from on this cover version. But, you know, there's another cracking track on this, is their cover of Roll Over Beethoven, obviously at the time done in the style of the ELO version. And I always wondered if some of the string players that were on that cover might have been on the original ELO record. It's possible. I mean, there is a rumour that one of the Hot Hits albums was recorded at Abbey Road as well, although Martin said to me that he doesn't ever remember this or any of the other covers albums that he played on ever being done at Abbey Road. He said that they were done mostly at Morgan, but then some were possibly done at CTS in Wembley, and he did mention another studio as well. But I think Morgan Studios was the main one. But anyway, I hope you found this semi-interesting about these rather bonkers records. And the great thing about these albums are, you go into any second-hand record shop, you'll probably find these in the pound bin. And the other thing about these records is that because they were made by EMI on their Music for Pleasure imprint, the actual vinyl is very good quality. It's pretty thick. And the Music for Pleasure label, what was good about that label as a budget label was that many of their records that they had released, they would then reissue on the Music for Pleasure imprint. And one album I've got, it's Jeff Beck's Beckola album. But they reissued it on Music for Pleasure with a pretty budget sleeve, and they called it The Most of Jeff Beck. But if you look at the Matrix numbers on the Run Out Groove, it's exactly the same cut as the standard EMI Columbia pressing. So you can basically pick up, probably for £1, in any second-hand shop, a copy of The Most of Jeff Beck, and it's actually a pressing of Beckola from the same lacquer as an original first pressing. So, you know, you get that original sound quality for not much money. Anyhow, hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please give us a like and all of that. And I've linked into the video where you can listen to the whole of this Hot Hits album, and hope you find it interesting. Anyhow, I'll catch you on the next one.